Okay, we'll start in a minute. We're now running on YouTube and people are filling in, so we'll start in 1 minute. All right. We will begin then. Welcome everybody and good evening. Tonight's program, Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh in the Media, Perspectives from Around the Globe, is the result of collaborations between the Armenian Center at Columbia University and Nasser, and between Nasser and the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation, who supports Nasser's series on contemporary Armenian issues. So I want to thank each of these groups for coming together to support tonight's program, and I especially want to thank Dr. Khachik Muradian of Columbia University, both for initiating tonight's program and for his strong sense of collaboration and cooperation. And I want to say that there are other joint programs being planned and details will be forthcoming very soon. My next order of business is to offer an apology for the breakdown that necessitated the postponement of last Thursday's program until tonight. I won't bore you with the details. Mainly, I want to thank the panelists and all those who registered and re-registered for your understanding and for your flexibility. Thank you very much. As you can probably imagine, I had prepared introductory remarks for last week, which for rather obvious reasons simply are no longer pertinent and which have been discarded. The news that reached us here on the East Coast last night casts tonight's program in a rather different light than it would have if it had taken place last Thursday. This doesn't mean we're not going to talk about the media response to the war that began on September 27th and ended last night, however, but it means we will be talking about other matters as well. And it means everything we say exists in a different framework or context than it did roughly 24 hours ago. So we do this despite the pain we're feeling right now, and knowing that that pain is small compared to the unspeakable pain, mental, spiritual, physical pain of those in Armenia and Artsakh, and especially those who have lost family and friends. I'm not a priest, and this is not a religious service, but I pray that we have the strength as a people to come together, to persevere, and to not grant victory to those whose goal is the destruction of the Armenian people. None of this will be easy. I don't know what to recommend towards that end specifically, but I feel that this is what we must do. Tonight, we are fortunate to have 5 highly knowledgeable speakers. And again, we're grateful to them for sharing their insights and their professionalism with us at such a difficult moment. We will hear from each of them before opening up for a question and answer period, during which we will pose questions as time permits, selected from those submitted via the Zoom Q&A function. It will be hard to do so, even harder perhaps than usual to do so, but please try to keep your questions short and on topic, and we will choose those which seem to most properly suit the context of our discussion. So I will now have the privilege of introducing our first speaker, Maria Armoudian, who is a senior lecturer at the University of Auckland in New Zealand and is the author of 3 books, reporting from the danger zone, frontline journalists, their jobs, and an increasingly perilous future. Kill the Messenger, the media's role in the fate of the world, and the forthcoming Lawyers Beyond Borders, advancing international human rights through domestic law and courts. He is the founding director of the Project for Public Interest Media and the founding host and producer of the syndicated radio program, The Scholars Circle. We're very lucky to have her with us, joining us from New Zealand tomorrow. Maria, I turn it over to you.
Yeah, I wish tomorrow had better news. Thank you so much. Parat says, I'm very happy to be with you. I wish it was under better circumstances. But let me share my screen first and tell me what this is, if this is showing.
Yes.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to talk today about media violence and peacemaking. I've got a couple of questions that kind of frame this conversation. One is how do media influence, and particularly with conflict, peace, and genocide. Then what influences the actual media messages and the stories that we get? And then I'm going to close with the need for ethical journalism. So I want to start with the kind of what scholars have found that the effects of media have been. Of course, it's gotten a little bit messier since the advent of the internet and social media, but it's still these three main effects. One is what we think about, we call that agenda setting. What is the criteria with which we judge each situation, each scenario? We call that priming. And then how we think about what it is that we are thinking about, and these are called framing effects. So I'm going to talk mainly about framing here, because that is one of the primary ways that parties try to win battle is by framing the situation in a conflict. It's part of the war. I call them frame wars. It's the use of information, misinformation, disinformation, and framing to both justify and motivate a physical war. This helps to advance the fighters, persuades them to keep going. It also persuades constituents to support a war. And then sometimes it persuades the outside community to either weigh in or not to weigh in. This quote that I use frequently about a bullet can kill a man, but the ideas behind the bullet can kill thousands or more. This is kind of the idea behind it. It says really important to understand framing, even if it's a subtle change in framing. One experiment that was done dealt with this group, the KKK, who wanted to do a rally. This is something really, obviously something we're thinking about again today. Now, this group has obviously a difficult history in the United States and a pretty heinous history, but the television news had framed it in two different ways. And so scholars had studied the effects of that in an experimental mode. And what they found is when television used a free speech frame, people were generally supportive of this group to go on and move forward with their demonstration. But when television framed it as a matter of public safety, people were much less inclined to support this. So this is the same group, the same history, the same event, and two different frames produced two different responses. So this is the power of framing. So when you go directly into a conflict, I pulled up three headlines about a 2012 conflict between Israel and Gaza. And if you were to get any of these consistently, you would think a different person was responsible for the difficulties in that conflict. The first one you can see how it's Gaza militants being the bad guys renewing rocket fire. But then if you look at the next one, and that's all you're getting, Israeli bombardment enters fifth day, you would see it in a different light. Now, of course, people don't only get one frame in the world that we live in today. But when you do, you end up with some pretty horrific ends. Media have exacerbated conflict to the point of genocide, what I call a genocidal frame, helping to enable and persuade people in the Rwandan genocide, in the Holocaust, and in the Bosnian War. In each of these scenarios, people were actually, in many cases intermarried and intermixed until these frames started to persuade them that the other needed to be isolated and then further eliminated finally. So the other thing I like to say, though, is that media can also facilitate peace and reconciliation. Um, we saw a long-term conflict in Northern Ireland in which the journalists and the media themselves were, as they said in their own words, up to the back teeth in the conflict and were ready for a peace agreement to come through. So the frames did change. Burundi, right next to Rwanda, this was a short-lived peace, but this was an effort by international media organizations and the international community to bring about peace after they too had a genocide, and it required reframing and restructuring the media. That brings us to why we get the media message we get. Part of it is structural. What is the structure of the media? So there are three main ones. There's a corporate control. This is generally not free and independent because it's constrained by money, and that prevents certain kinds of coverage because they don't want to spend the money or they want to grab eyeballs and grab attention. There's a hybrid, of course, in some cases. Say the New York Times has a mission in addition to being a corporate model. There's also a government controlled model in which it can sometimes, again, be with a mission like the BBC, can end up doing really ethical journalism, but can still be constrained by the government itself, which we saw in the Northern Ireland conflict, again, with the BBC being constrained by the government. Then, of course, there's party and organization controlled. When it's extremist, that's when it's mostly dangerous. For example, Rwanda, again, the media came under control, the RTLM of the Hutu power, which broadcast the hate messages, the genocidal messages, and really how to actually kill their Tutsi neighbors. So what are the other factors that might influence coverage? Most conflicts are ignored. Ours did get some coverage, even though there was an election going on and COVID going on, but usually there has to be a local hook that gives it local importance in order to get it into newspapers around the world or TV around the world. But the other thing is safe access. If journalists can't get in and can't actually witness and talk to people and see things or count bodies or go to hospitals, then they have to rely on official sources or distance interviews or social media, and these can all be really skewed. Officials end up with what we call a frame of he said, she said sometimes. He said this, she said that, and it really doesn't advance knowledge in any way. It also, particularly journalism, has norms of being new and novel, what they call, man bites dog rather than dog bites man, and also a violation of values. This is part of why we get some of the worst news and don't get some of the good news. But on top of that, you also have journalists who have a strong sense of duty, often a strong sense of morality and values, their emotions, that they bring to the fore, especially ethical journalists who want to really enlighten, and that affects what we get. Local journalists always cover things differently than foreign correspondents. They have different interests and different audiences. And then finally, journalists face censorship from their own editors, from countries that won't let them in or will punish them by either expelling them or imprisoning them, or groups that might kidnap or, in worst case scenarios, behead. We've seen some of those. And these make it really difficult to get reality from conflict zones. In addition, you've got news biases. So what gets eyeballs? Drama, conflict, discrete events. This happened. No explanation. Personalization, which makes it just about the people in the picture without linking it to a historic context, and simplifying it. This all went with the corporate model because that's what was easy to deliver and enabled to capture the biggest audiences. I mentioned the he said, she said framing. That is this alleged objectivity, which is not always objective per se. And then, of course, when you've got a conflict, you end up with some ethnocentricity, which is we tend to report on what they did to us and not what we did to them. And Sometimes there's room for that, but it doesn't always bring about a kind of a fair response. And then finally, I think today's media is really difficult for legacy because combatants have their own way of communicating. That includes countries, like in this case, Azerbaijan and Turkey can communicate what they want to who they want without journalists. And journalists have been not just disintermediated, but really removed because they don't need them anymore to tell their story. And in fact, journalists become a problem. So they push them out so that they can frame it the way that they want to frame it. They can become part of the story. And if they are considered enemies, they can be targeted for death. And we've obviously seen that in the worst case scenarios. Journalists can get looked up by Google their name, look them up, don't let them in. And then, of course, traditional media have shrinking budgets. They don't want to subject their journalists to really dangerous situations. And so this is meant to sort of frame the rest of the conversation to help us understand why we're getting some of the media that we're getting today from Artsakh, and to just kind of put that into what we can do next to help people understand the realities for the people of Artsakh in Armenia. Thank you.
Maria, thank you so much for that lot of information, a lot of media literacy packed into 10 short minutes there. And we've had so much proliferation of media in recent years. I'm not sure if there's been a commensurate proliferation of media literacy, and that is always badly needed. So thank you for that. We'll now go to our second speaker, Emil Sanamyan. Emil is a senior research fellow at the USC Institute on Armenian Studies, and he edits the Focus on Karabakh page, where he's been doing yeoman service, to say the least. And he writes on politics and security in the Caucasus and in the wider region. His articles have appeared in Jane's Defense Weekly, The Economist Intelligence Unit, Foreign Policy, The Diplomat, Open Democracy, Eurasia Net, and elsewhere. And he's a graduate of the University of Arizona and Virginia Tech University, and lives in the Washington, D.C. area with his family. Emil, thank you for being here with us, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you for having me. You asked me to talk about the role of the Russian media in this covering this conflict. That's what I will do. Russia, of course, is the biggest player in Armenia, biggest player in a larger region, the South Caucasus, and Russian broadcasters have a significant market share in Armenia to this day. Many Armenians watch Russian television. Primarily, they watch entertainment channels and non-political coverage, but they do watch political news as well. Over the past couple of years, the role of the Russian media, the large role of the Russian media, has become controversial in Armenia because the focus of the new government has been to arrest former senior government officials, and particularly controversy around the repeated arrests of Robert Kocheryan, the former president, was a big issue in Armenia. And Kocheryan kept getting positive coverage in the Russian media. He probably gave around 4 or 5 interviews to major Russian TV channels and news agencies over the past couple of years. As a result, that of course caused the annoyance with the new government of Armenia, and they moved in the last few months, actually, shortly before this war, to curtail Russian broadcasting in Armenia. They passed some new legislation that, of course, created additional irritation towards this current government because most of the channels are official channels, officially controlled channels, and by curtailing their ability to broadcast in Armenia, that was seen as an unfriendly step by the Armenian government towards Russia. As a matter of fact, in the middle of July, after the first public Turkish government threats against Armenia and announcement of this war, which was largely ignored in Armenia, the director of one of the main figures in the Russian official media landscape, Margarita Simonyan, who is a Russian Armenian, posted a very caustic, very angry message on her social media, talking about how Pashinyan has done everything to antagonize the Russian government, and even though they hate him, basically, in so many words, they would still come to Armenia's rescue if, when that would be required. So that's kind of a little bit of the background, immediate background to the Russian media role in Armenia now, and particularly this coverage of this conflict. I could talk about the three types of media that covered this conflict. Of course, in the past number of years, the Russian government has done anything they could do in terms of controlling media landscape in Armenia, in Russia, particularly broadcast media. So if in the past we used to have quite a few privately owned channels, pretty much all of the major channels today are owned by either government directly through its sort of surrogate agencies, or government corporations such as Gazprom and other entities like that. So that's the biggest chunk of Russian media. So I'll talk about that. That's probably the most important expression of Russian policy. Then there is still surviving liberal media. Most of it is online now, and most of it is now actually based abroad, based in different European capitals, or operating in Russia, but with a smaller sort of following and smaller signature. And then the third type of media, which is a smaller, much smaller segment, but I thought it was probably played the most important role in this situation in Karabakh, is sort of the niche military news type of media, which is widely believed to have connections to Russian military intelligence. So starting with the official media, what I could say about that is that there was not one unifying message that they were trying to push, and in part that reflected the mentioned irritation with the Armenian government. So even though most major Russian TV channels would, during their political talk shows that they would host, they would express sympathy to Armenian side, and but it was very distant sympathy. They would always remind that the government in Armenia is not friendly to Russia, and as a matter of fact, Aliyev is more friendly to Russia. They would talk about the connections to the Armenians and important history, Russian-Armenian history, but there would not be any urgency or effort to sort of focus on either war crimes in taking place in Karabakh, or other events that would sort of push Russia to intervene, just as Russian media did in sort of run up to Russian intervention in Georgia, which was a big build-up, very quick build-up to intervene, and in Ukraine. Again, there was a lot of build-up to get a lot of disinformation used to encourage Russian public support for Russian intervention. There was none of that in this conflict. It was clear that instructions did not come down from the Kremlin to sort of encourage Russian intervention. Another important factor in Russian state media, even though it is state-controlled and it is essentially following or operating in a way that they believe the Russian government, Russian president wants them to operate. There are still very important differences there, and particularly, like I said, Margarita Simonyan, for example, she is Armenian, and what you could talk about in that sense, she heads the Russian broadcasting agency that includes Russia Today, RT, the main Russian foreign broadcaster. RT's correspondent arrived in Karabakh day after the fighting began, ahead of many Armenian correspondents, and he remained there for a month straight without leaving, and doing daily coverage on the events there. By contrast, if we take the main Russian government news agency, which is TASS, still the acronym standing for Telegraphic Agency of the Soviet Union, but it's a Russian government news agency. TASS, it's headed by a close personal friend of Ilham Aliyev. So even though TASS is supposed to be also present in a lot of those places and has a correspondent in Yerevan, a permanent correspondent, unlike RT, they did not send that correspondent to Karabakh in deference to Aliyev and instructions from their boss. So there were this local lobbies that exist within Russian government media landscape. Beyond that, major Russian TV channels did not do much of a coverage from the ground. If you take the Russian First Channel, Channel Россия, or Channel NTV, there were some episodic coverages, but they didn't have people on the ground permanently like RT did, Russia Today. If we shift to the liberal media, again, there was no unanimity of opinion in liberal media. Because on the one hand, liberal media sort of had this residual sympathy towards Pashinyan, towards the new Armenian government after the revolution, as possibly as some kind of a precursor to maybe changes in Russia. Of course, that didn't happen, but there is this sense of sort of camaraderie with the new Armenian government within this Russian liberal media space. What was interesting, though, is that there were also TV channels like Rain TV, Dorst, that was clearly very biased against Armenia and was very friendly to Azerbaijan, and people were curious whether they were getting some funding. And there is, there are varying levels of quality within this Russian liberal landscape, Russian liberal media landscape. If we look at sort of the main liberal figure in Russia, Alexei Navalny, who was just poisoned and still recovering in Germany, I don't think he made a single comment on the situation in Karabakh. So that sort of shows you his kind of position and lack of interest, perhaps. Of course, he comments on a lot of things that are happening in the world, even though, of course, in the past few months, he's been mostly concerned with his own personal health recovery. Another episode that I wanted to highlight is there was a very prominent Russian journalist, also doubling as a liberal politician, Ilya Azar, who was one of the journalists who also covered 2016 war, including he was one of the journalists who covered the war crime committed in the village of Talish in 2016 when 3 elderly Armenians were killed in their house and their bodies were mutilated. He came again to cover this war. He got into Karabakh, I think it was around October 7 or October 8, and reported that things were going badly for the Armenian side militarily. And literally within hours of publication of his article in Novaya Gazeta, which is one of the main Russian liberal newspapers still published in Russia, his accreditation was canceled by the Armenian government, and he was forced to leave Armenia. So that showed sort of lack of, tolerance from the Armenian government towards any kind of critical reporting. Of course, local Armenian media were under martial law, which made it impossible for, many of my colleagues to report on what they actually saw and what was going on, and to be able to kind of let the Armenian public know ahead of time before this, the surrender was announced, that things were going badly and might make sense to surrender earlier before you lose more territory. But that's on the liberal side of things. And finally, the niche media, two outlets that did a lot of legwork under bullets, under missile fire, under drone fire, were these two news outlets. One is Anna News, which became famous in Syria. Even before Russian intervention in Syria, Anna News had managed to gain access to the battlefield in Syria through the Syrian Assad regime and cover fighting in the Damascus area and throughout Syria. So they did a lot of coverage that, earned them a lot of following around the world, because it was sort of like real on-the-ground war pornography that you could, only do with great risk to your life. And journalist that worked in Syria, I think his name is Igor Kharchenko, he was in Karabakh, along with another journalist with him. and they did a lot of coverage from early on throughout the entirety of the conflict. They didn't leave Karabakh for even a day. If we look at the coverage that emerged from this conflict on the news, and this other outlet, War Gonzo, which is really just sort of a blogger turned into a journalist, Semyon Pegov, and another one of his colleagues, Alex Kots, who later left. They're still on the ground, actually, and they've been on the ground from the beginning. Again, provided coverage, different coverage though. On the news was much more neutral in its approach and did not do the spinning for the Armenian Defense Ministry. Semyon Pegov, who got much more access through the spokesman of Armenian Defense Ministry, Artsakh, basically worked as Armenian PR guy, Armenian military PR guy throughout this conflict, and tried to play up the situation positively for the Armenian side, downplay any negative developments, etc. So to summarize, Russian media has, I think, predictably played the most important role in covering this conflict. I don't think there is another sort of national media that compares to it in terms of presence, in terms of variety of reporting. There's been some really good sort of human stories that were written out of this conflict that I saw in Russian media, mostly small liberal or sort of blogger outlets. But of course, the most important aspect of this coverage has been the official media, and it sort of coattailed with this Russian policy of dual policy. On the one hand, sort of sympathetic to the Armenian situation, but very distantly sympathetic and very irritated with the Armenian government at the same time. I'll be happy to answer questions when they come up.
Emil, thank you very much. Covering a lot of ground there about the complicated Russian perspective, and given what looks like Russia's important role in the end of this conflict, I'm sure there will be a lot more to say about.
It's not, the conflict is not ended, of course.
Yes, well, or what was put on yesterday. There will be a lot more to say about how Russia covers it going forward as well. So let's now go to the third speaker. Aida Arbal is adjunct professor of politics at New York University in the Department of Politics, where she teaches courses on Middle Eastern politics and democratic theory. Aida is also managing editor of Haytert, haytert.org, a multilingual minority news aggregation site in Turkey, and one of the founding editors of Azad Alik, azadalik.wordpress.com, a multilingual politics blog primarily dealing with minority issues in Turkey, and it is on the Turkish media that Aida will focus. So, Aida, you are there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Yes, hi. Just gonna share my screen and then continue from there. I will try to show you a little something like a clip. That's why that side of the screen is empty. Hi, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Khachik, for inviting me. Thank you, esteemed speakers, for enlightening us on things that we were not able to follow at all times. I'm going to talk about Turkish media coverage, and I'm going to try to do a couple things in this short time and leave some of it to the discussion if there are any questions. So I'll first go and talk a little bit about changing Turkish media scene since 1990s. And then I'll talk a little bit about where do we look for data? What did we do in the last couple weeks as Haytert when we were looking for data? And what were the themes on Twitter, especially on Twitter, because we couldn't parse the Facebook data, but we looked at Twitter data with our volunteers, and I'll talk about that data. So first of all, AKP rule in Turkey had a sort of its first 10 years of seemingly democratization, during which period the media also democratized, meaning that we had a lot of sort of newspapers popping up or websites popping up. And also there was another democratization going on the side where, for example, we started to see headscarf women in positions of editorial, in positions of ed, and also press personnel, which you didn't see before. So this was a way of including them. Then, of course, pre-coup and post-coup, you see several seizing of key media outlets by AKP, some based on some, financing issues, others based on taxation, others based on, on what's going to become the sort of culprit in the coup, and seizing their press assets, the Zaman Group and whatnot. So you have pre and post-coup authoritarian turn when it comes to the press that you have to know. But prior to, let's say, 2009 or so, prior to Twitter, I would say, or penetration of Twitter in Turkish social media sphere, you would really have more regular papers and less, media outlets, online outlets, websites. Right now, it's more or less the reverse. However, the online versions of the newspapers still have an edge in terms of having audience and whatnot. So opposition journalists and journalists and academics usually now write on outlets, online outlets such as Sputnik, BBC Türkçe, BBC Turkish, Indie Turk, which is independent Turkish, DW Türkçe, and T24, Diken, Al Monitor, etc. Also, of course, you have to pay attention to the financiers and the sort of ideological leaning of all these sites. It goes without saying, we learned hard way, obviously, during this war as well. Not that we didn't know, but it got sort of, our knowledge got reinforced in terms of that. What I'm going to talk about is very imperfect. There's a lot data missing, and readership data is missing, impact data is missing. You really, if you want to sort of get a hold of what sort of impact this 5 weeks had over, or 6 weeks had over audiences, you need more nitty-gritty detail. For example, we know, we looked for the first 2 weeks of distribution of key press, which is like printed press. And printed press, by the way, lost a lot of blood because of web readership. I mean, you have to understand that in Turkey, the circulation was around 3.5 to 4 million at its top point, where the most read paper, either Zaman and Hürriyet, would accumulate 1 million readership or 900,000 readership each, respectively speaking. Right now, pay attention to the numbers. Regular press readership has declined dramatically. I mean, and you cannot just explain by AKP. The part of it has to do with AKP, but obviously everywhere, even New York Times and Los Angeles Times and other press papers have lost audience. So pay attention to these. These are the main sort of newspapers that have been circulated the most in Turkey in these 2 weeks, the first 2 weeks of the war. So I want you to pay attention that in terms of ideological distribution, or the ideological sort of sphere, it goes from pro-AKP to counter-AKP and vice versa. For example, Sözcü is known to be the newspaper for a lot of secular nationalists, ulusalcı, etc. And then Hürriyet is mixed right now. The ownership obviously is pro-AKP, but in terms of distribution of its op-ed writers, it's pro-AKP and mixed old guard. Posta is again mixed, and Türkiye is obviously right. Milliyet was anything like old Milliyet, but still, to a certain extent pro-AKP, but again with secular basis, etc. Yeni Şafak, certainly of Al Bayrak Group. Al Bayrak is the family of the former finance minister in Turkey, who got ousted in 2 days ago. Not ousted, actually, he resigned. And then, although of course, if you want more detail, is like this group was not necessarily did not necessarily see everything eye to eye with AKP, but normally they are in the same ideological line as AKP. So let's look at the distribution of website readership. This is very recent, by the way. I got this from similarweb.com. Again, it follows more or less the traditional press in terms of hits. And in terms of non-regular or non-traditional media like websites and whatnot, Sputnik is #1 as outlet, and this is something that the recent report from Center for American Progress, this was also a headache for Americans, because Americans are supplying some, not all, some of the sort of opposition websites, and they want more readership, but they were complaining in that report, I don't know why they did that openly, in that report, that Sputnik still holds an edge when it comes to the distribution and readership of news, because Sputnik is best, they were saying in that report, in terms of regular journalism, not op-ed. And the other outlets, which we know as opposition outlets like Dubai, etc., CAP's critique was that they were mostly based on op-ed. Okay, so that goes without saying, op-ed does not necessarily attract a lot of readership. Still, people are looking for traditional newsmaking when they pick things. And this is another sort of source. This is again from SimilarWeb. I want you to pay attention to number 16 here. Number 16 here is an ideological outlet for a lot of things. That in the old days, it was really an opposition ideological outlet. This is like a online crowdsourced dictionary where people do enter, entries on their own. Everybody is a writer, author, like regular people, lay people. And this was where main liberating discussions took place in the early years of AKP. Right now, it's mostly taken over by jingoist nationalists, with some still presence of some opposition, but really by them. And then when we look at the sort of distribution of key information, how that information is distributed, obviously Facebook, Instagram, Twitter are the best ways to distribute information. And I'm going to talk about this later, but here you have to pay attention to the numbers of readership and authorship and also impact. Kim Kardashian obviously has a lot of impact. The Kardashian-Jenner family has a lot of impact, especially on Instagram when they use Instagram for political messaging. And Facebook is 10th largest Turkey is 10th largest usership in Facebook. You can look on your own, to the data. I'm gonna give this to Mark if there is a website or whatnot, these slides, so that you can check the data later if you want to check the data. And also, you have to understand that WhatsApp is a key place to disseminate information. One of the reasons why I said this is imperfect, because there's no way we would be able to understand the WhatsApp data. But WhatsApp is a very important application. Remember, Bolsonaro won an election on WhatsApp, despite the fact that he didn't have the money to conduct a proper electoral campaign. So WhatsApp is very dangerous, but very important for messaging. So normally, if we had time, which we didn't have, this is Azadjan, one of the editors of Haytert, sort of put together, we will be able to look at all relational data since the beginning of this year to see whether we could tell anything from all media that we covered on Haytert. Not Haytert, sorry. Actually, some of this information is not even covered on Haytert. So Azadjan is using his own web spiders to gather this information. If we were to further willing to look into relational data, we would see this, for example, that early in the year, we see all these relations between Tayyip Erdogan, Aliyev, Putin, etc., even before, the war was set in motion. So what I did for myself to see whether Google search query data overlapped with the Twitter sort of data, this is from last week. I did not update this. I'd updated other things, but this is from last week. I looked for Karabakh, Azerbaijan, Kardashian, Ermenistan, and Hocalı. This is Turkey Google query. The first 2 weeks, actually the first 4 weeks, obviously some of the detail gets lost when you do 5 weeks in total, but pay attention. There's a September 27th spike, and then there's also a Kardashian spike here on the yellow line, and then you see other spikes. And these spikes are one of them is the Ganja bombing, the other one is the Lavrov piece, the first sort of time when they talked openly about that, etc. So the Google search data from Turkey captures interest in Turkish people, and then you can tell all this data from obviously city-based as well.
I know we're at 10 minutes.
Okay, I'm done.
Take another minute and wind it, please.
Okay, so we thought that Turkish press started to cover this September 25th onward, but really it starts to cover earlier, somewhere around, very early, I would say, somewhere around between 20 to 25th September, because of the fact that there are two key information over there. One is Aliyev's BM speech. The other one is Lavrov's meeting with Safarova. And then it is both captured here in Google search and also on Twitter data. So obviously, it goes without saying, some of this information is information that you would expect, is that the entire spectrum, save for HDP, the Kurdish party, has been extremely nationalistic. I would say, I would use the term racist, not very often, but certainly very racist on the margin. I mean, obviously on the general outlook of it. And all soccer teams, all main greater municipalities, mayors, they sided with Azerbaijan, and they were very celebratory in the last 2 days. And by the way, the Turkish right, center right and right, they were in command and control of the message. The Turkish left disappeared altogether from Twitter. For example, Turkish right pundits, they would have all these long threads with maps and videos and whatnot. They would try to convince people, no response in kind. I want to show one little thing, which is 20-second, and I'm going to stop there, and hopefully I'll, go and talk more about in the question when we talk about the Q&A. So 27 September onward, which is the first time where this data started to come to Twitter, they started to obviously use and abuse Hrant Dink's sort of legacy based on this 20-second piece that they tweeted from several accounts. This is the largest account, but this has been tweeted. There are two videos. This is the first one that has been tweeted, in which Dink says the following. Let me show it this way.
Başta şu Karabağ sorununun çözülmesi gerekiyor. Karabağ sorununun Azerbaycan, Türkiye, Ermenistan, Rusya, ABD neyse artık bir araya gelip orada açık ve net söylüyorum, Ermenistan işgal etmiş olduğu topraklardan çekilmesi lazım. Başta şu Karabağ sorununun çözülmesi gerekiyor.
So they have one Hrant Dink for every bad situation that they want to evade. So this was how they did this time. So I'll just cover the rest if there are anything to be covered during Q&A. Obviously, there is a lot still.
Thank you.
The good Armenians versus the bad Armenians.
Please stop sharing your screen.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. And we will go to our fourth speaker, Ohanes. Ohanes Gökçen is Assistant Professor of Comparative Politics and Conflict Resolution in the Department of Political Studies and Public Administration at the American University of Beirut. He has published 2 books on the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and a third on Lebanon, as well as numerous scholarly articles in academic journals, including Middle Eastern Studies, Nationalities Papers, Middle East Journal, and the Maghreb Review. His forthcoming book on Russian intervention in Syria will be published by McGill University Press. So we hand it over to Ohanes.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Khachik, for organizing this event. In 10 minutes, I would like to present the view from the Middle East, the coverage of the war from the Middle East. Few sentences, first of all, on the Middle East in general. In the Middle East, much emphasis has been placed on the representation and the reporting of contemporary conflicts, including the Arab-Israeli conflict. Usually, strict regulation of broadcasting by authorities in the Middle East has made it difficult for groups to produce and distribute radio and television programming. Little attention has been made to what conflicts mean for those involved in them, whether as agents or as subjects, particularly in today's globalizing times, when solidarity is once taken for granted based on ethnic, gendered, religious, or other forms of representation are constantly challenged and reimagined in various cultural and media spaces. How conflicts are narrated in the Middle East makes certainly a difference. Narration should include actors and spaces that have been sidelined or neglected in the public and academic discussions of conflict. The concern is to shift attention in the study of communication and conflict from top-down analysis concerned with formal politics and the elites to discussions of everyday and the non-elites. When it comes to reporting of conflict or war, the focus has been on reporting in the news media, the communication of conflict between various parties and to outsiders, journalistic ethics and norms, objectivity and bias and propaganda. Little attention has been paid what conflicts mean for those involved in them. Probably this has been the case not only in the Middle East, but elsewhere too. It is in this context that I would like to refer to reporting on the Karabakh War in Lebanon. First of all, I focus on the print media. In Lebanon, many Lebanese did not know about the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. We do have political freedoms in Lebanon, contrary to many other Middle Eastern countries, and this led to media freedom. One of the few things that we still enjoy in Lebanon is freedom of the press and freedom of mind, which is not the case in the Arab world in general, because the Arab world has not been democratic and solidarities are taken for granted. The role to the media is important to pass information about the conflict and the war to a variety of audiences. The press does not depend on the government to provide information, so we do not have a struggle between the government and the media over who tells the story. The media is independent, and it is not a government tool that simply passes on whatever they are told. It is also important to stress that Lebanese established dailies like the An-Nahar and the Al-Jumhuriyya, the Republic in English, usually have large-scale production facilities and strong advertising revenues, although they have been affected by the economic collapse. The print media provided helpful information, independent reports and analysis about the Nagorno-Karabakh Artsakh conflict and what has been going on. Al-Jumhuriyya, for example, the Republic, has been devoting a whole page to report on the Karabakh conflict, whereas An-Nahar devoted less space, but titles on Karabakh appeared on the front page. Let me bring to your attention some of the titles that Al-Jumhuriyya, the Republic, elaborated on, between quotations, some titles: renewal of fighting in Nagorno-Karabakh despite the declaration of ceasefire. Another title: Armenia denies accusations by Baku of shelling Azeri enclaves near the borders of Iran and Turkey. Another one: Aliyev, no mercenaries in our ranks. Pashinyan, self-determination is a right of Karabakh. Another one: Armenia to Azerbaijan, no sky unites us. We will fight to the end. Still another title: the Armenian Foreign Ministry, the ceasefire is primary. Another one: Pashinyan, we will launch a counterattack in Karabakh at the right time. I think he did the opposite. Another title: Yerevan, we have indisputable evidence on the participation of the Turkish army in the Karabakh war. Few more titles from An-Nahar so that you have a general view on the themes and the titles that the print media actually wrote about and elaborated when it covered the Karabakh war. So from the An-Nahar, the Karabakh conflict spills over to Armenia. Mediators are powerless. Another title: loss of hope in a ceasefire. Aliyev, I can control Nagorno-Karabakh militarily. And the third one: Pompeo accuses Turkey of instigating the Karabakh conflict and Russian military drills in the Caspian. These titles give you a sort of idea. To continue, it appears that the print media combined information from a variety of sources that allowed them to construct more balanced and sophisticated stories about what is happening. There has been no attempt to promote their own agenda, and this was very important. There has been no negative coverage or biased coverage that would undermine the position of the Armenians. I say this because the news media are seen as a weapon that can be used against the other side. As I mentioned, journalists were in a position to cultivate alternative sources of information to increase their ability to play an independent role. Storylines were not dictated by the government or certain groups. Certainly, this was a healthy development, for it provided and still provides the Lebanese with a more balanced picture of what is happening. I would like to refer to two analytical articles that appeared in An-Nahar by Salim Nassar and Ibrahim Bayram. Both pieces emphasize the different players and agendas in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. There is particular emphasis on the Turkish expansionist policy in Lebanon and the Middle East, and that in Lebanon, such a policy is unlikely to succeed because the public or general mood, as the authors put it, of the Sunni community does not coincide with the neo-Ottoman tendency and plan of President Erdogan. Salim Nassar's article referred to, just to give you additional ideas, Salim Nassar's analytical article also referred to the proxy war between Russia and Turkey going on in the Caucasus. The only article that was written under such title about a proxy war. Also, the author mentions here that a number of Lebanese, Armenian Lebanese youth encouraged, motivated, actually left to Armenia in order to participate in the war and fighting going on in the different battlefields or the fronts in Artsakh. So also, I mean, on Russia and the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the other article by Ibrahim Bayram, the author elaborated on Turkish expansionism. A lot is, I mean, this topic or theme has been actually elaborated on in a number of Western media outlets, but I mean in Lebanon, this article was also unique, published in An-Nahar, and certainly the author here explains that there is no sympathy, although Turkey tried to penetrate, I mean, Lebanon culturally, economically, and recently trying to incite political disturbances, but still, I mean, it has no space to act in that way. In Lebanon, actually, the government has its broadcasting corporations. Two more sentences on broadcasting and TV stations, and I close. And all the major political parties have their own TV stations. And this is not available in the rest of the Arab countries in the Arab world. Now, it is important to bring to your attention that the Armenian community took the initiative so that the MTV, the OTV, the LBC sent teams to Artsakh to report from there, covering the war from areas close to the battlefield. Still, the OTV devoted a 30 minutes program for 2 weeks to cover the events by hosting one of its journalists who was sent to Artsakh to cover the events and convey the stories from there. The NBN finally has an agreement with Russia Today, RT, and it broadcasts news about the South Caucasus and interviews with some Karabakh officials. One of those significant interviews was with Masih Ismailian. So this was in general, I mean, what the Arabic language printed press, actually printed media did in Lebanon, and broadcasted media actually did in Lebanon. The most important thing was that so far still they did not take sides. I mean, and they reported the events as they were, and that was something actually welcomed by many Armenians in the community. I leave it there, Mark. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ohanes. Thank you very much. We'll now have our fifth and final panelist, Stefan Asturian, who is the William Saroyan Director of the Armenian Studies Program at the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Asturian is the co-editor with Raymond Kevorkian of the soon-to-be-published volume entitled Collective and State Violence in Turkey, The Construction of a National Identity from Empire to Nation-State, and the author of a forthcoming volume entitled At the Crossroads of the Armenian-Azerbaijani Conflict, History, Territory, Nationalisms. Professor Asturian, it's all yours.
Hello, Mark. My talk will focus on, let's call it the modes of production of information and knowledge, essentially in the West, in particular in the US, and the explanatory frameworks, the themes that were presented to explain what has been going on in mountainous Karabakh over the past 45 days. First, let's look at some of the rhetoric, themes, and the patterns of distortion. There are all-time players in this field. One of the traditional ones is a peace-loving person. His name is Tom DeVal. He is a kind of guru in the West, in the US, to explain the Karabakh conflict. His book has a lot of useful material and is not to be dismissed at all, but it relies essentially on a particular trick, which is equating sides, fake equivalences, neglecting the details of the chronology to establish particular phenomena such as ethnic cleansing. And the whole thing is wrapped in the rhetoric that, I have a bleeding heart, I would like peace. These two groups of people have lived for a very long time together, and so on. The second phenomenon is, for example, what we can see in one of the articles of Carlotta Gall in the New York Times. It drew the attention of some Armenian organization and the community. Carlotta Gall, there are many people like her. The main thing is the approach. In that article, she tries to explain why this conflict took place, when it took place, and basically she relies only on the explanation of Azerbaijani officials. Something that a first-year, quite average history student in a mediocre college would learn to avoid, that is relying on one-sided sources only. Is being published in the New York Times by a journalist who has done very good work for a very long time. Now, the themes that have been developed to explain this conflict or to frame it are also very interesting. Here I have to give credit to Nanor Barsumian, who wrote a very interesting, lengthy article in the Armenian Weekly. When Azerbaijan has been shelling civilian populations for days and days massively, Karabakh Armenians shell Ganje, essentially trying to destroy military targets. Then you get titles, Armenians are bombing, shelling civilian populations, residential populations. There are 41 civilians killed and so on. So this is one type again, the chronological distortion, you know. Apparently they have only to get shelled themselves, and once they are dead, they will be sorely missed by these people. One of the most common thing I have, I haven't read everything, but I have come across many articles, especially when things were going poorly in 2016 with the Tavush conflict. And also in the case of this one, the Genje corridor, the oil gas pipelines are threatened. The energy infrastructure that is essential to Europe has come under threat. This is another theme. Naturally mentioned as Nanor states that the conflict is taking place in Azerbaijani territories, that those territories are recognized internationally, but the only thing they skip over is that for the past, I don't know how many years, 15, 17, since 94, 95, all the negotiations are based on the two principles of self-determination and territorial integrity, and that appears also in the Madrid principles and their subsequent variations. I have even seen claims, and Nanor has found the same thing, that actually Armenia is trying to almost get shelled so that Russia would intervene. There are themes about the deep humanitarian friendship between Israel and Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan being very tolerant to Jews. Armenia is anti-Semitic, Azerbaijan is a friend of Israel, Armenia is a friend of Iran. Azerbaijan promotes religious freedom, and so on and so forth. All those themes appear in various articles in the US and England, and you could even find some in continental Europe. Now, what is the system? What leads to this situation? Well, I would like to share a screen with you. There is a quite remarkable, very short article by a person I don't know, Setrak Mrgdichian, in medium.com, and he has really documented the system in the United States, at least. I can tell you that I suspect that it is even worse in Great Britain. Here is the constellation of lobbying, financing, and ties of the Aliyev regime in the United States. Now, you notice there is no racism here, no preference, no prejudice. We feed the left, we feed the right. New York Times, Washington Post, Atlantic Council, Foreign Affairs, Washington Times, The Hill, Times of Israel, Roll Call, National Interest, Huffington Post, ties that go to President Donald Trump, ties that go through the brother of John Podesta, the Podesta Group, to the Obama Group, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, a constellation of various organizations and lobbying groups. The most important ones are certainly BGR, Governance Affairs, Podesta Group, Fabiani and Company. I will say a few more words about that one later on if I have time, and so on. So you see the system. I mean, things are not happening in a void, and you have here a very nice illustration in one country. Okay. Some of the organizations involved are or the individuals involved reach exactly the top of the Azerbaijani state. For example, there is an organization, Azerbaijan-America Alliance, founded by Anar Mammadov, an Azerbaijani tycoon, son of Azerbaijan Transport Minister Zia Mammadov. Okay, Mammadov is the one who bought right to use the Donald Trump name to build the still unfinished Trump International Hotel and Tower in Baku. In pursuance of 22 lobbying reports, more than $11 million were spent on Fabiani and company to lobby Azerbaijani interest in the US. And that Fabiani and company shares actually the same building as the Alliance, Azerbaijan-America Alliance. $2.5 million at least to the Podesta group to reach the elite of the Democratic Party. And you get an idea of what people are dealing with and how things are organized. Under the guise of lobbying, actually the whole system is essentially legalized corruption. And that's the beauty of the Western system, no? So it's very interesting. A few individuals have distinguished themselves in their Azerbaijani, pro-Azerbaijani activity. There is another article here, for example. One is the former US Representative Dan Burton, who served as the head of the Azerbaijan-America Alliance in early 2013. He has since resigned with some problems. Another one is one Jason Katz, the founder and principal of the Toolshed Group, started in 2008. Now he has been super active, writing a series of articles in Huffington Post and elsewhere, The Hill, and getting quite a bit of money from his sponsors. Another old-timer is the famous Brenda Schaffer. She used to be some kind of executive director of the Caspian, I don't know what it was called, Caspian Institute, something at Harvard, financed with oil money, supposedly academic. She has been all over the place. She wrote a book actually more than a decade ago with extremely bad academic reviews, but ironically enough published by MIT Press. It was the whole issue of Iranian Azerbaijanis and how they are fed up with Iran and so on. So she is advancing an agenda that happens to be similar to the agenda of some intelligence agencies in a number of countries, in particular the US and Israel. She is said to have ties with one of those intelligence agencies. I read an article a long time ago. I have no idea about that. She was able to place articles in New Republic, Washington Post, New York Times, and currently she works for the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. So I assume Azerbaijan is probably a democracy right now. Now, the issues to be avoided, the topics that shouldn't be dealt with if you are semi-intelligent, unless you are ethnically Armenian, of course. One of the issues is that Turkey is a member of NATO and is using the geolocation system of NATO, the monitoring system of NATO, has AWACS planes near the Armenian border, getting all the information and providing it to the drones for targeting Armenian targets. Now, the Secretary of General of NATO said we have nothing to do with this conflict. On the occasion of the birthday of the Turkish Republic, he sent a really moving congratulatory message about what a valuable ally Turkey is for NATO. The Turkey-NATO thing, you won't find dozens of articles, I can assure you. Maybe except the Middle East, you won't find hundreds of articles on the specific Islamist groups being exported to the South Caucasus by Turkey. Actually, it is indeed embarrassing because a few years ago, some of those Islamist groups were called the moderates in the US. You see, they were the reasonable ones, not ISIS. Basically, the West created them. So I guess that is not a good topic if you are an intelligent journalist. Finally, I think I'm getting close to the end. I would like to say a word about Armenians. Over the years, I have noticed that there is among Armenians a fascination with victimization. I suspect it has reached a level even of enjoyment. It's sad to say in the current context. We have to look at the Armenian side. I have given you a very, very concise idea of what's going on. And I could add things about England. But, you know, one has to ask, where was the Armenian government, the Armenian governments over the past 2.5 decades when this system was being put in place by Azerbaijan? Now, I know Armenia didn't have the oil wealth of Azerbaijan. But we have also here lobbying organizations, political parties, wealthy people, and very clearly nobody is going to convince me that substantial work has been carried out to at least counterbalance, you know, the dissymmetry with Azerbaijan. So I think if we analyze the war that has just ended, if there are two fields where Armenians were totally dominated. It was the technological and aerial field, drones, airplanes, and so on, monitoring, and without any doubt, the lobbying and information fields. And I am done. Thank you.
Stefan, thank you very much. Well, okay, we have a lot to process. And I wanted to add actually something to what Professor Asturian was just saying. And this is information I was going to have included in remarks last week and removed, but I'm going to refer to them briefly anyway now. And that is that the US-Azerbaijan Chamber of Commerce was established 25 years ago by James Baker III, who served as an aide to President Reagan as well as President Bush. And it still exists, of course. And its honorary council of advisors includes James Baker III. It includes ex-National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft, Henry Kissinger, John Sununu. Its former advisors include former Assistant Secretary of Defense Richard Armitage, Vice President Dick Cheney, and its board of directors includes representatives of Chevron, British Petroleum, Boeing, former Massachusetts Congressman Democrat Bill Delahunt, and its board of trustees, of course, includes Ilham Aliyev and others from Azerbaijan, and the veteran neoconservative hawk Richard Pearl. So the work that the Armenian lobby groups do, of course, is done in the face of this, and that needs to be borne in mind at all times. There is a serious disparity of resources and influence that needs to be confronted. So let us move on to the question and answer. I'll ask you all to please turn your cameras and microphones back on. So we have a question here for Emil Sanamian. Emil, you have suggested, the question says that Pashinyan is not well liked by Russia and by Mr. Putin. Can you please provide more data regarding your point of view? And I'm guessing you can.
Yes, I can't see myself in the camera. I'm not sure if. Okay. Yeah, here I am. Well, as we all know, the events in Armenia follow the course that was taken highly critically in Russia. The Russian politics is dominated by one person for the past 20 years, Vladimir Putin. And there's always been a concern that there might be, considering that there is not a normal political way to change government in Russia, that there might be a popular uprising that would result in overthrow of the current elite. Over the past 2 decades, we have seen events such as that in Ukraine a couple of times, in Georgia, in Kyrgyzstan now, I think already 3 times. And this notion of what in Russian political speak is called the color revolutions has been paramount in Russian political discourse. The view is that these uprisings occur not because of public discontent, popular discontent with power abuse, which is obviously the main reason for their for them, but that there is some kind of manipulation from the West, and this is a way of the way in which the United States and other Western countries attempt to undermine Russian influence in the former Soviet space. So when the events in Armenia occurred, that's how they were framed in Russia. Even though Pashinyan from early on tried to assure Russians that he is not planning to change the course of Armenian foreign policy, and he did not because they didn't really have any other options. There was very little interest from the West, considering the state of affairs in the United States and state of affairs in the European Union. Both concerned with Trump and United Kingdom leaving EU. He stuck to pro-Russia policy, and as a matter of fact, took more conciliatory steps towards Russia that even Serge Sargsyan did not take, such as involvement in Syria, which was a token involvement, but politically significant. Still, at the same time, the main tensions between Armenian government and the Russian government did surround, like I mentioned, the issue of jailing Robert Kocharian, whom Vladimir Putin framed as his personal friend and kept congratulating and kept seeking his release. And like I said, his official media kept highlighting his situation and interviewing him when he was out. So that was one point of tension. Another point of tension had to do with the Russian TV channels. Another issue that I mentioned sort of grew out of the Kocharian issue. Another issue had to do with claims by the Armenian government that the Russian state-owned companies operating in Armenia, such as the railroads and electricity company, etc., did not pay enough taxes, and basically, where they were raided by tax officials. In the end, tax officials did not bill them or did not seek any damages, but there was this whole sort of set of tense moments that occurred in the last 2 years between the Armenian and Russian governments, and that was reflected in the way the Russian public in the TV sense, in the sense of coverage that is allowed on the official TV, framed Pashinyan as this agent of Soros, or I don't know, agent of the West. That kept on going even throughout this period of fighting. That was reiterated. So this is the overall picture, and of course, they had an impact in how Russia reacted to this conflict.
Thank you. There's a question here for Ida. Ida, can you explain a little bit more about what you referred to in your remarks as the disinterest of the Turkish left?
First of all, I don't think there really is a Turkish left, to be honest. You have CHP, which is technically speaking center left in a number of issues, but really this is a fight between drinking rightists and non-drinking rightists, if I have to put. There's a culture comes that sometimes Armenians also, for some reason that I don't understand, fall on one end of that culture count, and then side with CHP, especially in the mayoral elections. But you have to remember that CHP is the party that was against the 2016 foundations law that gave back some of the properties that Armenians have lost, not Armenians, all minorities have lost during Republican years. And therefore we were able to, finance our institutions in Turkey. So CHP was against this. Deniz Baykal was, was one of the rabble rousers because this was against Lausanne's reciprocity. As a matter of fact, people do not pay attention, but in CHP's 2018 electoral plan, this Lausanne was still mentioned. And CHP is the only party, I checked all the party programs, with Lausanne particularly being on its agenda as a party program. Not even MHP has Lausanne on its party program. So this is the left. The other left, there are two more lefts, really. Like one is the Kurdish party, HDP, which I don't classify as left, but people are willing to classify as left. I'm going to probably anger a lot of people because HDP is an amalgamation of, right now, especially in the last couple elections, of conservative Kurdish vote coupled with leftist Kurdish vote, plus some sort of 1% of Turkish liberal left vote. And Turkish liberal left are very close to Armenians normally, but during this time, I didn't see anybody posting even a little article on this conflict. A lot of people try to explain this by risk-taking and whatnot. I don't think it has anything to do with risk-taking. I think it has a lot of things to do with the larger sort of redemption element, the white savior element that usually is in their sort of mindset. There was nothing to save Armenians this time. Even if they wanted to save, they wouldn't be able to save anyway anyhow, first of all. Number two, they were not really interested in this conflict. I don't think so. This is the reason why I said in my presentation, I don't know how much of it was I was able to convey, but the right and center sort of ulusalcıs were in command of the entire messaging in Twitter space. And when you would see a little bit of left trying to gain a little ground, it was again always either trying to protect Garo Paylan from all sorts of attacks, including a very important attack by Ahmet Hakan, who is the editor-in-chief of Hürriyet newspaper. Ahmet Hakan is important because Ahmet Hakan was also making a program at CNN Turk, which is the Turkish version of CNN. And in that program, many years ago, he targeted Tahir Elçi, who is a very famous human rights lawyer who got assassinated in Van, right couple of days before his assassination, asking him to denounce sort of PKK as a terrorist organization. And then a lot of people obviously were very upset with him, targeting Garo Paylan this time, saying that, oh, you are equating baby killers with sort of this decent army of Azerbaijan. Second day, he retracted because there was a lot of obviously counter or trying to protect Garo. But I don't think that the left can or wanted to do anything more than our Armenians. And then obviously, and also because of the fact that Dink had been sort of instrumentalized in this again, by the center right, but also center left. Everybody retweeted this little clip where he says, by the way, there is no beginning, there's no end to the clip. We don't even know what he's talking about, but it doesn't matter. He says, Armenians have to pull out of the occupied of the territories they occupied. And then of course this was read as Karabakh as well, not the rayons, nothing, no such discussion. It was all like in one thing. So there you go.
I recognize that clip came from the Sarı Gelin film, which was the denialist propaganda film.
I don't know, because this clip has been around forever. This is actually two clips were circulating by Hrant Dink. This is one of them. The second clip is about, why the Europeans kissed me or hugged me, was I selling my country to Europeans? He realizes that Europeans do approach to him in one of the sort of EU meetings or whatever, and then he feels bad. So these two clips have been circulated back to back. By the way, I have to say this may sound a little weird to those people who are not very conversant in Turkish politics, but Ulusal Kanal, who's the canal of Perinçek, is very is an sort of is an archive, has an archive of all sorts of Hrant Dink clips. This one, the European, why the Europe hugged me, and also another sort of clip where he criticizes Kurds, saying that, oh, you should not trust Americans too much, Americans come and go, blah, blah. So they pull a Hrant Dink for every single issue because he was talking about so many issues, and then they use this. By the way, you have to also understand that April 24th, and also not in the January 19, but April 24th, you would see all this one little Perinçek group with all sorts of Hrant posters on their hand, basically rehashing the same information, that Hrant said at some point, this patriotic, like Hrant, the good Armenian, the sort of poster child of everything good Armenian. So there's no, in other words, people are talking about Turkish Armenians being hostage, but really his legacy is also hostage. So it is in this context that I read, for example, Delal Dink's article, which came a couple of days later, trying to balance, and also not balance, obviously, there's no way you can balance this because this has been seen a million times. So it's very depressing altogether, the entire thing.
Indeed. Ohannes, the question, and maybe this can be, anyone can address this, but the specific question is to Ohannes about the Lebanese media. Did it report on the mercenaries who were being smuggled into Azerbaijan by Turkey? And for that matter, was that reported much in any media outside of the Armenian media?
I refer to Arabic language media, and I didn't talk about the English language media because the only English newspaper, the Daily Star, is not publishing anymore. It is online and stopped from being printed. The issue was raised also there in the Daily Star, the online print media, but it was very significant, the issue of the mercenaries being raised in the Arabic language print media and broadcasted media. The two articles, analytical articles that I referred to, every day, by the way, for 43 days, every day there was a space devoted to the war. And certainly when this issue of mercenaries came to the open, it has been mentioned, emphasized, and the interesting thing was that it was related to this extremism demonstrated, by Erdogan and in Erdogan, and Turkish expansionism in the Middle East, even beyond the Middle East, particularly because Erdogan a number of times mentioned, where we are present, it belongs to us, something like that. Where we are, it belongs to Turkey. Mosul in Iraq, Aleppo in Syria, and even cities in Libya. I did not elaborate on the relationship between, the geopolitical context of the conflict. Certainly there is a relationship, yes, to what happened in Karabakh and what has been happening in the last 10 days in the Idlib province in Syria, and the mercenaries being deployed from there to Karabakh, to Artsakh. The Syrian media also emphasized this, and I didn't refer to the Syrian printed media and statements by the Syrian government itself, emphasizing this issue also. The issue of the mercenaries, the ready-made standby Turkish army that Turkey is able to deploy to any place in the Middle East and outside the Middle East, I mean, just to use it for its own purposes, expansionist policies and expansionist purposes. I think this is enough. If not, I can elaborate more.
So, question and issue, maybe can throw this to Stefan and to Maria, and it's sort of a general question of how Armenians, however you choose to define that and wherever you choose to define that, how Armenians can be more successful in creating media that better represents what we believe are truthful representations of Armenian issues.
I'd like to start, if that's okay, just because I have to leave
Please.
in just a few minutes. I think for one, it's to be active in contacting journalists. Their email addresses are often at the bottom of their articles. And especially if you have personal stories, if you know somebody in Artsakh and you know a personal story, or if you're from there and you can tell that story from that perspective, journalists like the personal stories, and those do resonate. So I think that's one thing. And if you can't get through to one journalist, go to the next and go to the next and go to the next, because there are some that are going to be moved and some that are not going to be moved. Secondly, I'd say letters to the editor. Definitely. If you see something published that is completely erroneous, write a letter. Force them to make a retraction if it is in fact untrue. So I would say those two things. And then the third thing is we all have access to social media now. And we can actually do so much more with Twitter, Facebook, other social media to bring other people up to speed with what the issues are. The thing is, you've got to remember the constraints of being concise, being precise, being honest. And I would say in this day and age, it's important to speak to people's hearts. You've got to let people know the emotional toll and the physical toll in a way that they can relate. I think that will go miles. And then language is important. So one of the things that I saw in the Northern Ireland crisis was what different language people used, even to define a territory. We call it Artsakh. They call it Nagorno-Karabakh. And it confers a kind of legitimacy. So be mindful about every kind of word that you use because of that legitimacy that goes with it. And then keep reiterating the indigeneity of our land. There's a whole question around legitimacy of belonging and who belongs. And so I think that is something that needs to be cleared up as well. And there's scientific studies that show who's been there forever.
You talked a lot about framing in your presentation, and it seems pretty clear that Armenians have not been winning the framing war in this situation.
And not losing completely either, because there are some good articles and such that's out there. It's just, there's so much out there, it gets lost in the morass and people get confused. Personal stories, if you have them, are really important to traditional journalists.
Stefan, would you like to add?
That is not my field, to tell people how you get in touch with journalists, newspapers, and so on. So I have nothing to say about that. The only thing I have to say is one thing that is absolutely clear. There has been some kind of an Armenian state for 30 years. That's a lot of time, 30 years. 3 presidents, 1 prime minister, 0 organization between the Armenian state and the diaspora, the vast resources, talents of the diaspora. There are no structural ties thought out, structured, addressing various domains, nothing. Okay? I think the starting point is to have people who have a modicum of intelligence and see the importance of finally creating such a structure in various domains. I am not just saying about lobbying, journalists, and so on. There is medicine, there is physics, there is history, there are all kinds of fields, okay? And all that is happening is usually individual initiatives or small group initiatives, often originating in the diaspora, going, knocking at doors there to create a school here, help in a hospital, and so on. That is not the responsibility of the Turks, of the Azerbaijanis, of the Russians. They are not victimizing us there. That is Armenian responsibility, and in particular, the responsibility of the various leaderships, regimes that have come to power in Armenia. So I think the starting point is there, and the rest is mechanics, you know, to find the right ways of approaching. I am sure we have at least a dozen people. I know at least 2 people in the US who could easily tell us, tell the relevant people how to do it. Okay. And in France, we have many journalists, for example. But first, you need to put in place the structure. You need to have the vision. You need to have the policies. If you don't have all that, the rest, you know, we can have panels like this one every other day. How Stefan Asturian can solve this problem is totally irrelevant.
So I have a question that I would welcome any of you to respond to if you can. It's not really a fair question given how new this situation is, but in the past 24 hours, as the peace agreement was announced, how has it been being presented and framed in the various media that you have been following since the news broke around this time last night? We'll start with Emil, if he would like.
Well, the little that I saw in international media was positive because you know it's a ceasefire and end of bloodshed. Of course, because of the resignation of the Western governments to the fact that Russia is dominating in that part of the world, you know, people really don't care if tomorrow Armenia becomes a part of Russian Federation, just as the little that's left of Artsakh basically has become a protectorate of Russia as of today. So yeah, it's positive. I mean, I'm not sure if there would be a big backlash in Armenia actually if you know, the government in Armenia, this one or the next, decides that hey, we can't really handle independence. We couldn't handle this one big accomplishment as an independent state, the victory in Artsakh. So you know, let's just fold and let the Russians defend us.
Ohanes, have you seen coverage of the announcement of the agreement in Turkish and in Lebanese media since, and how has it been contextualized, framed, and so forth?
Oh,
All right.
simple answer is that sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ida.
Okay, simple answer. Victorious, very celebratory, but it started really earlier with Shushi, really. It didn't start last night. And you have to remember that with Shushi, there was a lot of like back forth, whether it fell or it did not, because there were conflicting news coming from Turkey's side or the Azerbaijani side, and then Armenian side. So there was a back and forth there. Celebration started then. This is when the 3 mayors of CHP, Izmir, you know, Istanbul, and in Ankara started to celebrate. And then, of course, when Pashinyan's sort of speech came out, there was an Aliyev video that he was rejoicing his victory, where he was asking in a very, I would say, nonchalant manner. Oh, it's not even stately, but nonchalant. Oh, what happened, Pashinyan? What happened to the status quo? So this was played over and over in all feeds. So this was a relief from their perspective and a celebration of victory.
Johannes?
If you allow, I would like to add one more thing on what my friend Emil said. I mean, a statement by President Putin himself that this agreement is a victory for both peoples. Just that. Now, concerning today, 3 p.m. in the afternoon, the Lebanese, Lauriane Lejour contacted me and wanted to conduct an interview on the situation. And I gave them the interview. Hopefully will appear tomorrow. Mark, it's today that everything has become clear that we have signed an agreement. I mean, yesterday night, it was, an uncertain situation going on the TV, and the printed press today morning didn't write about it. So I think tomorrow it will be in the printed press, and a number of articles will appear tomorrow. That's why today there was nothing significant in the printed press on the agreement, because it's very recent. I mean, yes, that much.
I forgot to say one thing, Mark. Besides being celebratory, also there was early news that Turkey is going to be part of the Russian forces, which is being debunked or not debunked. So there was a question mark there for a long period, while Turks were saying that they are part, and Turkish journalists were spinning around this. With this, the Russian media was saying something else. So there was that in the early hours too. Speaking of which, Maria is not here, obviously. She talked about indigeneity and how Armenians belong to sort of the land. But you have to understand that, for example, Kurds also claim Lachin, Kelbejar, this entire region. Let me tell you what they claim theirs as Kızıl Kurdistan, the Red Kurdistan, which was part and parcel to this coverage in Turkish as well. People missed that part altogether. But there was a number of articles in Turkish about this being a war where Turks and Armenians are fighting over what was the Kurdish land. And this is the places that they claim as Kızıl Kurdistan, Kelbejar, Zengilan, Kubatlı, Cebrail, and partially Zangezur. So you have to read, for example, partial silence based on this as well, this information, because I also looked at Google data for query for Kızıl Kurdistan, both in Kurdish and Arabic, thanks to Katya Peltekyan and Asbet Koçikyan, because they helped me to figure out how it's written in Arabic. And of course, it follows this data. It follows the coverage, Kızıl Kurdistan data on the news, the peaking and, the down. So one little something about, especially Armenian intellectuals, please, let's be humble. Let's just talk about things that you follow properly. Do not rely on New York Times or Washington Post for your Turkish news. That's not the place. Do not rely on your friends. That's not the place to gather information. You have to be on the ground and not necessarily barking this or that agenda, because the enemy of your enemy is not necessarily your friend. It goes without saying. Just a little humility about everything, about the Turkish press, relations in Turkish press, coverage in general, Turkish politics, because, and also, of course, people think that this is just an AKP issue. İlker Başbuğ was on a very lengthy interview on Sözcü with Uğur Dündar. And this is, by the way, İlker Başbuğ, for those of you who do not follow Turkish politics, he's one of the former chief of staff. He said openly that he wants to see Turkey join with Azerbaijan in one country and one flag, under one flag. So this is a general policy. You have to understand that this is not a left-right Islamist. Moreover, you have to also understand that there was this whole image of war. War of images story. For example, Turkey choosing a spokesperson who is, blonde, and this is the second female spokesperson for Turkey. And then messaging through her. This is lots of symbolic things also were going on, which doesn't change a lot of things on the ground, but it also tells you that there's a lot going on in the background with relations, the new constellations of Turkish capitalists everywhere, from Libya to Syria to gas to whatever to the drones. So it's a whole mess altogether, that we have to sort out in the coming days.
And it's important, as you say, that we know what we know and we know what we don't know, and what the difference is between the two. So to pick up on something that Stefan said earlier, it is probably very tempting at this moment to, I don't know if these were his words, but wallow in victimization and bitterness and frustration, and it is good cause for these things. But I hope what we will all do is get busy and see what can be done. I really appreciate, again, all of you taking the time. We lost Maria; she had to check out a few minutes ago, but your insights, your time is very valuable and much appreciated. So thank you on behalf of Nasser, on behalf of the Columbia University Armenian Center, and on behalf of the audience for your time. And
Thank you.
Good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.